First, I'd like to thank Joe Schatz and the Binghamton debate team. The hospitality here was fantastic. The tournament was really well run. I had a good time. And it is a lot of hard work to put on a tournament, especially one as big and important as this one. So a huge thank you to you all. I would also like to thank Gary Larson for tabbing the tournament, Sarah Partlow-Lefebvre for directing the tournament, and I'd like to thank Quram and Sion because it's been a pleasure to debate you throughout the year. A few other people, my parents, who taught me to read and are also pretty cool people. I'd also like to thank a few people from high school. Special thanks to Abby Shermer, who taught me how to debate as a little 8th grader, and to Andrew Jones, who debated with that little 8th grader. I'd like to thank Edmund Zagarin, Eric Lanning, Carly Wunderlich, and Jason Segalis, who all contributed to that in various capacities through my high school career. I'd like to thank Dallas and Sherry for their constant support. Harvard Debate literally would not exist without you two. And Greg Rosenbaum for his involvement not only in running the NDT, but also with helping out with everything this weekend, from like driving us through the snow to making sure that I eat, which I don't usually do. The rest of our coaches, Dylan, Brad, Michael Antonucci, Matt Peterson, and Patrick Kennedy, all of you have been a huge help throughout the year, staying up, cutting cards, helping me with my homework, all pretty important. I'd also like to thank Suo, Anna, Dite, and Chris Lundberg for coming to this one. You've all been a huge help. The rest of the team has also helped us out tremendously, staying up, cutting updates, sending us a file before every Elam round. So Naima, Paul, Lev, Manny, Ayush, Michelle, Leo Kim, Sam Heller, Ali, and Priyanka. Huge thanks to all of you. Last, I want to thank David. What a ride, man. And I would like to thank the judges who are not obligated for this round, but are still doing it out of the goodness of their hearts, although maybe you two are. But I'll do my best. I know it's late, and I'll try to keep you awake.
We have another timer.
Do we?
I don't know. I can't find. Oh, there it is.
It's in the detritus.
Also, if anybody needs help staying awake with a lot of extra Red Bull. Yeah, like 90 people were like,
Good? Contention what is around the threat of regime change posed by military presence creates a security dilemma, the risk of miscalculation, full-scale war Merlecki, and Britain 14 conflict horizon, both sides believe falsely, the other respond to course of sets and positive inducements, invalid aggression, spiral model stands in contrast to the insurance model Hawks and Toronto. Washington believes the insurance model describes a current relationship and adherence had a significant effect on U.S. policy engagements and infrequent and half-hearted arrangements are simultaneously threatened with coercive measures. Carrot and stick approach, even when negotiations might succeed, they're unbound by threats. Both sides see themselves as a legitimate defender of the status quo behaviors, interprets aggression, the results of spiral third theories of mutual hostility, reinforce negative perceptions, and suspicions of greatest danger brought by misperceptions, not the only but escalation when each police must have shared resolve the risk over conflicts, real repeated rounds of successful policy choices and raise the perceived stakes of backing down to avoid catastrophe, substance of diplomatic conduct, refusal to negotiate, and inflammatory rhetoric, heightened misperception, miscalculation, increasing the risk of accidental or unintended conflict in the Persian Gulf. Small scale or accidental military encounter could easily trigger much wider conflagration. Military force and soft power driven regime change are two sides of the same coin. Only the threat of intervention prevents Iran from effectively resisting neoliberal infiltration. Hossein Zadeh, 15. The Obama administration's recent approach of relying on business market forces of climate change, of regime change and modification without ruling out the military options likely to be more effective than insistence on escalating sanctions. Military threats, the effectiveness lies in the fact that nuclear will significantly limit Iran's missile military and defense capabilities. The deal will also avail the U.S. extensive knowledge of Iran's economic, technological, security, and military vulnerabilities. This means that if at any time in the future Iran's replies or resists a heavy-handed imperialistic design to the U.S. can then employs war machine more effectively, there's no conspiracy theory. It is indeed a scenario projected by Obama administration officials in meetings on Capitol Hill with influential policy analysts. Suffice it to remember the fact that this is exactly what was done to Iraq and Libya. In both cases, the U.S. used disingenuous negotiations to collect information, then used the information for bombardment and effective invasion. Presence threatens Iran and emboldens the GCC, causing expansion of the military-industrial complex throughout the region. Multiple instances of ongoing violence in Yemen, Bahrain, and Syria. Jones love Iran does not seek destruction, Saudi Arabia, overthrow of Arab world's political order. The challenge of how best to deal with Iran's ambition is mainly a political problem, one that has for too long been treated almost entirely through the lens of security militarism. American military Gulf to embolden them surrounding Iran militarily, putting it under concepts that a military action strengthen hardliners and convince them the best path to self-preservation through defiance militarism, and the perceived dangerous has rivalry turned into a political and military arms race that could easily spin out of control. The U.S. military posture has emboldened its allies Saudi Arabia and Bahrain, justify the brutal crackdown of Bahrain's pro-democracy movement by falsely claiming Iranian meddling. American unwilling to confront allies in the Gulf during the Arab Springs. The public with continued belief in the The U.S. needs to keep its military. The results that Saudi Arabia and Saudis have covered debate badly both at home and abroad. The Arab strength demonstrated the old political order is vulnerable. The Middle East is moving to an era of mass politics. Saudi Arabia shares characteristics of its beleaguered neighbors, even flush with considerable oil revenue. Saudi Arabia has still been forced to unleash its police and security forces. The Obama administration will not demilitarize the Gulf, needs spending in new construction. Our plan skeptics warn that Iran would be emboldened, that terrorists would seek to hold the flow of oil would be imperiled, but these fears are exaggerated to the extent that these dangers are plausible at all. It's because our current policy makes them possible. The greatest risk is proceeding with the status quo. To disengage with our counterproductive Gulf presence would require the U.S. to begin withdrawing its military from the region. Blurring the binary between war and peace is crucial. The Gulf is not at peace. Believing that it is obscures hundreds of thousands of deaths. Jones 12, it might be time to argue U.S. military provided security 3 decades of war. Blood, this argument, war is not civility, peace between wars. Violence carried out by regimes against their own subjects makes clear the peace is not always peaceful. The cost has been high. Hundreds of thousands have died. Excruciating violent death, poverty, environmental disaster, torture, and wretched living conditions haunt lives of many in the region. The politics of war serve leaders who have exported violence to deflect internal challenges to their authority. Removing presence is key. The U.S. attempt to play a balancing role in the region causes conflict. October 11 from Droughts perspective, the military presence is the key destabilizing factor. Removal of American influences around sole strategic objective. Both sides have not been able to reinstate trust due to the U.S. also continue to grow on GCC military dependence and the U.S. gaspeds. Iranian their perception limits for military presence producing anti-Iranian alliance of defense normalization, reliance price, incident Bahrain, Qatar, and Kuwait. The U.S. plan to rotate its roles in external balance ignores developments and not only fails to solve primary interstate issues but also complicates existing ones. Neither sectarianism nor firm ideological conflicts between progressives and reactionaries sufficiently explain current events in the Gulf. Adequate analysis requires the attention to both the strategic and geopolitical drivers of the conflict. Gauss 14, the best framework for understanding the regional politics of the Middle East is Cold War among regional powers in which Iran and Saudi Arabia played leading roles in the military and political strength of parties' contributions that outsiders makes more important than the military rounds between Riyadh and Tehran. It's not an ideological battle. Progressive versus reactionaries contended camps not always united with tactical alliances crossing what appeared to be lines. Conflict was focused but not much of a player than the Middle East Cold War. A sectarian element cannot be adequately understood simply as Sunni versus Shia fight. It's a balanced power game. It can only be understood by appreciating the links between domestic conflicts, transnational affinities, regional state ambitions, local actors seek out regional arms to supply money, guns, ideological coverage, hypnotics. Where the empirical analysis of Saudi-Iranian cooperation during the 1990s supports our interpretation of how it down to 13th century Iranians were almost waging war during the 80s year world will start trust building in the 90s is previously out. The possibility and desirability of positive relations despite recent animosity. Sectarianism is not a factor. Political elements do not shape foreign policy. The U.S. pivotal American invasion of Iraq was fundamental, creating American military presence in the Gulf, leading to a severe polarization. It's expected that obviously the U.S. go against Iran, actively damage its interests around increased regional activity, creating a vicious circle. The plan, the United States should significantly reduce its military presence in the states of the Gulf. Cooperation Council contention to our method scenario analysis is highly valuable, enhances creativity and self-reflexivity, deconstructs cognitive biases, flawed ontological assumptions, and enables the imagination and creation of alternative futures. Environmental 16 cultivate relevance. Political science has been lamented. One component of generation substantive research programs actually policy relevant, strikingly little attention paid to techniques scenario analysis can immerse decision makers in future states go beyond conventional extrapolation. Scenario analysis is thus typically seen as serving corporate planning or policy, yet is not inherently limited to these uses. We characterize scenario analysis the art of juxtaposing current trends and unexpected combinations to articulate surprising yet plausible features referred to as alternative world scenarios are explicitly not forecast projections based on linear extrapolations. They're not hypothesis based extra predictions, nor should they be equated with simulations which are functional representations of real institutions. Instead, they're depictions of possible future states rolled together with driving causal forces that could lead to those futures. And if futures make scenario planning particularly useful, the ability of decision makers to imagine, let alone prepare for discontinuities is concerned by existing mental models and not well-known cognitive bias tendencies such as groupthink, confirmation bias, and perhaps scenarios their ability to help individuals break out of conventional modes of thinking, imagining alternative future worlds through a structured analytical process enables policymakers to envision, thereby adapt to something altogether different from the in-present scenario analysis can throw in a sharp relief, often overlook yet pressing questions in international affairs scenarios are deliberately forward-looking, identifying questions of great empirical importance, even if these did not appear in existing research programs. Participants learn strategies for avoiding failures of creativity and for overturning the assumptions that prevent scholars and analysts from anticipating and understanding. Valid descriptive understandings of the world are an essential prerequisite to emancipatory critique and epistemic decolonization. Jones forward the common sense view asserts that objectivity implies value for neutrality. However, to the extent that objective knowledge produces a better account of reality than other ideas, such knowledge is inherently critical of those ideas. Critical social inquiry does not only manifest its criticalness through self-claimed levels of siding with the oppressed, but through the substantive critique of failing ideas. Objective knowledge constitutes explanatory critique, exposing what's wrong with dominant ideology because ideas inform social action. Their causal efficacious ideas cannot be neutral. A normative committed to the oppressed until commitment to truth and objectivity because false ideas are in the interest of the oppressed. The best way to declare solidarity with the oppressed is to declare one's commitment to objective inquiry. Dominant groups has intentions, mismatched society, philosophical realist theory of science, provides an alternative response to the relationship between knowledge and power instead of choosing perspectives on the basis of our ethical commitment to the cause of the oppressed. We should choose between kinetic ideas on the basis of which provides a better account of objective social reality. Objective social knowledge has these qualities by virtue of its relation to its object, not its subject. A fundamental problem which underlies Eurocentricity is the silencing of the colonists with the result of flawed knowledge. Eurocentricity is therefore a dual problem considering both authors and content cannot be resolved through normative commitment. Soul and overcoming Eurocentricity therefore requires not only considered efforts in the center to create space and list, but also commitment to correcting the flaws and prevailing knowledge. It's not only the other who can and should elaborate this critique. It's the responsibility of European and American just as much as non-American and non-European scholars to decolonize. I heard the importance of objectivity can be seen as a form of epistemological internationalism. It's not necessarily African to attempt to tell a more accurate account of the history of Europe's role in the making of contemporary Africa. Red counter histories of the barbarity of Western civilization. Root cause explanations of IR don't exist. Methodological pluralism is necessary to reclaim IR as an emancipatory praxis and avoid endless political violence. Bliker 14. The key challenge is unchecked reification of dangerous because IR deals with some of the most difficult issues from genocides to war, upholding one's objective position without critical scrutiny can have origin consequences, living detection of self-reflective moments, positive positions, thought lines, white, explicitly post-positive IR, often like critical self-awareness reifications, consequence of all things, methodological pose, lies the heart of sustainable critique, multiple methods to understand the same event or phenomenon, scholar oscillates back and forth between different methods, paradigms trying to understand from multiple perspectives. No single method can ever adequately represent the event or gain the upper hand, but each should recognize and capture the details of perspectives the others cannot in practical terms. This means combining methods precisely when they're deemed incompatible. They can range from post-structural deconstruction to positive social sciences. The benefit of methodological policy humanities is not just the opportunity to bring out nuances and new perspectives. Reification may be checked to the source. Studying the security dilemma, it's a valuable contribution to IR scholarship. Shiroglu 14, a coercing power must ensure that coercive measures do not augment or add to the factors positively contribute to the adoption of objectionable policy by the target. Coercion could initiate a positive feedback loop if calls positively induce it to continue or intensify subjectionable policy beyond realistically expect that coercive measure would persuade the target to stop existence of such mechanisms. Augment anti-international relations services under the spiral model security dilemma itself attempts to states to look after the security needs and regardless of potential to lead to rising insecurity for others. Each interprets the measures as defensive end and the measures of others as potentially threatening. Policymakers often interpret events and action based on what they think to be true. If they think a state has hostile intention, neutral, or even friendly posture, more likely to be ignored, destroyed, or seen as attempted duplicity to attempt for their studying and coercive diplomacy. Start incorporating these concepts and more vigorously study their effects on successful utilization of the strategy. Do you want me to read any more cards? Okay, I'm good.
Okay. I guess, so, who do we hold accountable for doing the plan?
For doing the plan?
Yeah.
So if your question is like, does the debate result in anyone in particular withdrawing from the Persian Gulf? We don't think, obviously, that there's a one-to-one correlation between those two. But we do think
So
that
like
there
all of your
are a
impact
lot of
scenarios
dominant
indicate
scripts.
that there are
Yeah.
impending impacts coming now, and we need to act on them. Obviously, we don't implicate the particular scenario as your argument, right?
What do you mean
No.
now? Like
Right,
there's a
like your argument that
presence
situations
increases-
currently within Iran's
presence
like,
increases the probability of war at any given moment. It's not like coming tomorrow. It's
Right.
just something that is a structural condition.
Oh,
in the
so that
Gulf.
like it's not something that's coming / impending from our existing conversations / relationships to international relations. It's something like I'm asking
Not on a
you
particular
like
date, right? So
No.
present-
Right. I'm saying that. So I guess you two in the future, do you go outside and do things regarding international relations, regarding the Persian Gulf, or is it like the logic of scenario planning / our relationship to these things?
We think the 1AC has presented a good and exportable method for interacting with many different kinds of elites and intervening in many different sort of dominant scripts that can mystify the social
Sounds great.
to
That-
benefit
yeah, that was
dominant
my
groups.
question.
One of
I
those
guess-
is that Iran is
I guess,
fundamentally
what's the
aggressive
notion
and
of
that withdrawing would
pluralism?
cause them to take over
What's
the
the
Persian
notion
Gulf.
of pluralism?
Our evidence doesn't define it universally, but instead provides a sort of contextual explanation of it. Our evidence says that no single theory or body of scholarship can explain phenomena in their totality, and instead sort of drawing from different schools of thought, different literature bases can help us explain and map the world in a sort of better way.
Okay, and the one that you use to explain the affirmative is one of the securitization of the Persian Gulf, correct?
So the 1AC draws on the security dilemma, some theories of identity.
Okay,
Is
so
there
let's
anything
talk about,
that's-
Yeah,
like,
like
I guess,
alliance
what
structure.
Yeah.
words do we use to express a security dilemma?
What words do we
Yeah,
use?
like what
The
words?
1AC used some words to explain the
No, I'm
security
saying
dilemma,
like
but
what
there's
words
not
do we
like a-
use to express when we are facing a security dilemma?
all sorts of words. We could use aggressive, offensive, devious, sneaky. These
Right,
are
and all of
words
those
that have
things
been
we
used to describe
criminalize
Iran.
other countries, other places on a sociological register and say that those places are now criminal and we should securitize
Not
them,
always
correct?
criminal. Sometimes, for example, offensive realist scholars believe that Iran has legitimate interests in expansion, yet
Oh, so there's a
nonetheless
sense of legitimacy
let me
for
finish.
expansion.
Yet nonetheless believe that we should be aggressive back, which raises the probability of war. We disagree with those scholars just as much as we disagree with scholars who label Iran as criminal. Those are two different registers
Right,
that
there
are
are two
used
registers
to
of the ways that we
instantiate a
describe
security
and
dilemma.
instantiate security dilemmas.
Sure.
But yes,
That's why
but
it's a dilemma.
If the point of the
I guess
question
let's
is to
talk
reduce all
about-
strategic conflict to criminality, we obviously disagree with
Yeah,
that
I think you've
explanation.
explained your reiterants a couple times in a couple different ways that don't really get to the point of what I'm asking. But I guess let's ask.
And maybe I don't understand your question. Do you
I
wanna
get that.
take prep to ask it a different way?
Do you mind if I run to the bathroom before the one?
Yeah.
About to go.
Two, I'm sure nobody's surprised it'll be one off, just so everybody's prepared. Really? Were you expecting politics? So this is a sort of ridiculous thing that's happening. Being a freshman at KU and being in the finals at the NDT is really, really ridiculous. I'd like to thank the NDT committee for running this, obviously, for 70 years and probably will keep on going, I've heard. For Binghamton for hosting and doing an incredible job, thank you. For D3 for being a home. To my parents for not quite understanding debate, but attempting to, and still sending me like encouraging messages, even though they're sort of like interspace so that they don't interrupt me and still attempt to understand what arguments I'm going for and also respect them. To the whole KU team in particular, Harris, Sean, Allie, Banky, Emily, Jaleesa, Bricker, coaching me and Q throughout the year. Really couldn't have done it without you. My debate inspiration, Peg Weefalt, who is not here but is hopefully watching in Kansas. To Corona for sticking around and also saying the words, saying them well. I remember before she got the sixth speaker, I think it was like just a few places before that, she leaned over to me and was just like, oh, well, I was just aiming for 15th, but I guess not. And then there it was. And I really can't think of anybody else who deserves like that more. And you probably deserve more than that anyway. Just like a fantastic debater and someone that I really look up to, and it's been a pleasure debating with you all year. For Sean Duff and Chris Carey for letting me have a home at the BT, and Ashton Fry for joining me next year. To Nick Cottrey for just being a great friend to me, Mac for being like a mother to me, Burzer and Amit for almost constantly being on another level, Lainey, Hegna, Henry, Katzrob, and everybody else on the KU debate squad. It's been excellent having really a home at KU. To the people that like we debated in Elam's, Mimi and Michael, it's been a pleasure. Klarman and Kristen, really hope Brian comes to KU next year because that would be incredible. Needy and Spurlock, I'll see them next year. Krakoff and Morgan, really incredible debaters. To Hemanth and Herman, we've debated you 6 times already this year, which I think is probably the most out of any other team that we've debated, and it's been, you know, really incredible learning experiences every single time. Turner, Cram, Phil, Hearn, Renier, you've all judged us before this year, and it's been really good having you, getting your comments on our various debates, even though we pretty much say the same thing every time, but, you know, changes a little bit. People in high school couldn't have gotten here at all without Daryl Birch, who was really my really only coach throughout high school, but was the biggest influence in my life, and it's just been like a sort of chain because of course Harris was DB's coach in college at Louisville, so just a continuation of how debate is progressing. To my partner Victoria, who I only got to debate with for my senior year, but grew so much, got 6 bids to the TOC, and it was incredible, and it's hard to believe that was just a year ago.
High school debate.
Yeah, high school debate. It was just a year ago. And the rest of Capital Debate, to Troy, Kevin, and Mina for being, you know, local Towson debaters who would still take the time out to talk to, you know, rando high schoolers and give advice. To friends both in debate and outside, especially Christine, Sequoia, Nathan, all of my friends named Katie, there are a lot of them, Lizzie, Harini, especially, you all mean a lot to me, and also I hope that getting to finals of the NDT is enough to convince my dad, who is represented on my shirt today, to get us a team puppy, because I'd really appreciate that.
Team baby!
And team baby. Alright. Anyone not good? Their narrative of future legislative progress reproduces anti-blackness, prevents a paradigmatic analysis of modernity. The promise of the future prevents a full confrontation with the violence of the present. B creates a possibility of relief to come, only understanding time as anti-black accumulation can index existing conditions of violence. Dylan. In 13, anti-black is not operated slavery as a death sentence, cross generation time, and support captivity. The future is a face of possibility and hope. When we imagine the future, the outcome to pass the time. The past will when the present is the future becomes relief at a time. Does not pass but accumulates the future, not the time. The tendency inscribed in the present book comes ability to send this assertion by arguing the past for racial terror. Listen, but the present, but also vision. What to come? We know the future will be. The future will be what it was before. In public deliberation, structurally cannot include the position of the slave because they're denied person. By definition, the structural violence of slavery cannot be articulated within the political Hartman. In 9, concerned about the possibility practically related to the particular occupancy situations of the formation of the slave house that the political properly may both question the appropriateness of the political. This realm of practice reimagine the political in this context, historical and social limits of political must be recognized in order to evaluate the articulation needs of boarding claims and domains relegated to privatized and non-political agency of the enslaved is merely relegated to non-political status justified as subject removed from the political sphere formally outside the space of politics, everyday politics, practice of the enslaved general outside the direct forms of confrontation of the slave and not the civil man or free worker, but excluded from the narrative we the people with reformulation relation to state and civil society concept historical block and the expanded definition of the political maintains the notion of the political and separate from the effort and ability of a class to affect an enemy, and their grammar of geopolitics misunderstands global power. The absolute dereliction produced by gratuitous sexual violence and slavery constituted an entire global colonial order acting as a crucial lever for American empire rather than understanding Africa, the Middle East, and Asia as separate continents with distinct nation states. You should treat them as nodes in a vast and inextricable network of intimate everyday trauma and sexual degradation. Low in 15. Slavery was fundamental contradiction in U.S. history, force of potential slavery problem, the threat of rebellion lay beneath all of the nation's political process of brutality. Slavery was regime for extracting surplus value and trust, ownership of a human person, subjected men and women to violence and dignity, rape, and forcible separation from their kin and community. The conditions in which slave women were systematically subjected to rape and their forced reproductive labor offspring appropriate slavery was not an aberration of liberal democracy in the United States, but a central contradiction. The possible union of 1 million black slaves and 5 million white present laborers represented a potential revolutionary forces against this possible conversion of the southern ruling class organized in emancipation, not end slavery, but enable re-enslavement of labor, linking African nation, the Americas, centrally to black slave labor to the formation of the racialized global capitalism, and colonialism, and Asia, African, and Latin American development, American industrial capitalism dependent on slavery labor, deeply connected with the exploitation of agrarian laborers on plantations and nations in the Pacific Islands and Indian islands off the Indian Ocean, and African, Latin American, black American struggle was situated central to the apotheosis of Anglo-American empire, and modern subjectivity is conditioned by the psyche and material violence of slavery. Slavery is trauma initiated everyday conditions of intimate violence whose monstrosities depoliticized and rendered banal. Failure to attend to these hidden interpersonal sites of violence make global oppression inevitable. Sharp in 10. All modern subjects, post-slavery subjects, thinking about monstrous intimacies, means examining the everyday mundane horrors that aren't acknowledged as horrors and means a diasporic study attempted to, but not dependent upon nation and nationalism, linked by monstrous intimacies that are breathed in, like air and often not acknowledged to be monstrous extraordinary sides of domination and intimacy with ruptures, or ruptures with the normal that initiated enormous and ongoing psychic bodily breaches, and treating the state as a starting point for politics reproduces intimate violence, even if the state can produce gains for black people. Discussion of state-based public anti-blackness is overdetermined now. Their framework centering state-based relation of power marginalizes the intimate everyday private relations of violence sanctioned by state power that renders racial rape invisible. James in 13. The violent exploitation of black productivity in industrial, penal, and cultural markets is described as violence, democracy, terror, and black reproductive labor. Described here state intimate violence, state violence, and intimate state violence are distinct productivity and working labor based on economic exploitation and civil rights. Human rights violation become the primary analytical framework. Reproductive and marginalized as a theoretical space for humans for violent forced labor alongside captive males. Violence against the people forms often denied or deflected. The official chronology of a narrative about violence and terror that constitute U.S. democracy for order, child slavery, the conflict of prison, lease system, Jim Crow, segregation, mass incarceration, top diverse, ground out the black matrix, replacing it from philosophical inquiries into subjugation. The purpose and the nature of subjugation is extensive region interior space, colonization, clarification, black women's matrices that have no public records. Normative warfare as unconventional civilians are the primary targets for destabilizing terror, racial waivers, and active war, and focus on scenario planning accumulates perpetual anti-black war. Their politics makes blackness fungible to sustain liberalism. Basis bad is not offense because they're merely a manifestation of the United States' inability to account for its racialized impetus to empire. Saying in 3. As the U.S. has gotten its own war games into gear, the blur and fantasy and reality is intensified rather than a warring still within the space of insecurity and ambiguity. Whilst a legitimate U.S. administration elaborating the principles of action through which it hopes to define international relations with the next generation, does anyone believe the U.S. functions to make the world safer? Code of communication become a routine aspect of the U.S.'s far-right strategy in recent years. Discourse of consensus becomes especially historical, multicultural rather than inflationary causality of all. These were radical ideas that came out of World War II, namely the equalization of the material condition within the discourses of world democracy and nation building that would never exist without capitalism, liberalism, of course, through Throughout the Cold War, racism remained the Achilles heel used diplomacy and foreign relations to clear the stability of new U.S. realm of the action in the world was tied to the success of U.S. governmental response to the crisis, racial discord, and division at home. One of the key ideological attacks in the Cold War was the development of official discourse of anti-racism, legitimate U.S. power, and world affairs around the board unmistakably recognized the global currency of domestic racial reform. The U.S. is trying to improve every race and call it free democracy in the most civilized, secure form of power facing out toward the world at large. The current administration offers what is the very least a symbolic resolution of the post-World War II contradiction between America's imperial overreach and the Republican self-containment. This entails further dismantling civil rights, illegal detention, racial profiling of immigrants, and the extension of people say that already warehouses 1 million black bodies today hold the place of the revenge. The idea of the U.S. as a white male republic empire is a politics that faces archipelago-based empire. Moreover, it's not being constructed to colonial models of absolute othering through pluralism and multicultural strategies of differential inclusion. The circulation of U.S. style multiculturalism and its imageries of racial difference and diversity now provides a cultural logic for capitalist globalization, even and perhaps in the face of new imperialism, the U.S. continues to perpetuate a 50-year history of refusal to count as specific systemic role of historical racism, shaving contemporary global division between North and South. The price of this disavowal is a part of World War is in part of world which violence reigns supreme, in which democracy remains caught within the racist versus not amount of nationalist reassertion, the historic and ability to think of democratic powers outside the antinomy of ethnic absolutism has led in our own time to fundamental blurring the boundaries between war and peace, warfare and violence. Once thought to result in the breakdown of normal policies now appear in the norm rather than the exception we live in constant warfare and warfare state from the Cold War to the war in poverty in Vietnam, war police of the war on drugs to the Gulf War, the cultural wars of war and terror. War provides a general matrix for social and political life in the post-contemporary United States and the world that is its open frontier, and scenario planning can't produce productive futures. The only legitimate existing paradigms which contains inherently conservative limitation. Jones in 9. Assumption that the academic needs to be policy relevant, very pernicious. It creates all sorts of distortion and encourages academics to study certain things in certain ways with certain outcomes. So it's finding policy relevant research often predetermines notions of what it is relevant academics versus being drawn in policy-based evidence, making that endorse and legitimize the overall interests and ideology that underpin the prevailing order. The tyranny of policy relevance becomes so dominant that it imperils the academy, the political economy of research funding, and combines with tyranny of policy relevance. Politics relevance is double-edged sword. The key question always is relevant to whom. Now, violence experienced by others is contingent upon non-participation in domestic and dominant social practices. Anti-black violence cannot be evidenced through historical events because blackness as a structural position is constituted outside humanity, creating an objective, non-contingent relation to violence. Wilderson in 11. Beeley launched 66 operations against the largest police state. Vertigo must have seized them every time they clash with the agents of nuclear weapons, which change subjective vertigo is a dizzying sense of one is moving part of my clash with closely a symmetrical force and subjective vertigo is vertigo with the abandoned sensation that one is not simply spinning an otherwise stable environment, that one's environment perpetually on in terms of the relation of violence and can be analogized. Subjective vertigo to life and situated by disorientation or let's suppose performative violence. Black subjectivity is the intersection of performative and structural violence. Black descending though non-human black people's subsumption by violence, imperative necessity. Human revolution is subjective vertigo for the slave. There are no cognitive maps of suffering and dispossession. The affirmative anchor within civil society assumes a Gramscian struggle for hegemony in which citizens can occupy a position within a democratic polity and change the state from the inside out. However, the slave position as a recipient of direct form and terror does not demand a more ethical state, but demands an end to the entire coherence of civil society. Wilderson in 3. The dream students return to insights regarding a revolution in society which state capital formation protected by the trenches of civil society, trench constructed by initiative activities, and identity must be reconfigured. And before revolution, taking form of frontal assault is not the meaning of the working class pedagogic project for transforming common sense in good sense. The main of work, destruction and construction is the form in which worshipful power is exercised victory on these fronts make possible the conclusion of frontal attack. War movement for revolution to be feasible. The proletariat must be held to revolutionary position. For that to happen, the trench civil society must be transformed. War position parts by which workers form work-ins. Class civil society assimilating traditional intellectual and all personnel factual discourse on all of civil society firms for which we become hegemonic, mark after become hegemonic, and their focus on performance reproduces anti-blackness. These categories are unavailable to the black body because it assumes a sentiment, because it assumes subjectivity. Wilderson in 9. The effect of specific performance on sites of local resistance was seduced by an overvaluation of performance or social political effectiveness. The speaker would assert a causal link between the performance and the emancipation of black people who produce and consume the assertion of a hobble by mix of rhetorical factors. One analyzing the other sentimental substitution of sentiment for analysis is about the grammar gross of Africa structural violence. You think of this may not I wish to disavow relationality, would wish to be imbued with relationality, something else emerging. Even the African does not capture the slave in relation to the rest of the world. Prohibition against attaining differentiation to self-knowledge rather than structural violence removes black people from the world for to be known and appreciated as artists. Mark after as an artist. Can I just take a sip of water? Sorry. Okay.
Good?
Yeah.
Cool. So you forward the argument that the gratuitous sexual violence of slavery explains the international order. How does that explain why the U.S. props up the Saudis but contains the Iranians.
Okay, well, I'd say that your question needs to stop with why does the U.S. So why does the U.S. exist in the first place relies upon the forced reproductivity and capturing of black female
So you can explain why the U.S. exists as a country, but how can you explain those how can you explain
Can I be clear, He-Man? The lack of explanatory power also, so it's sort of a dualism / a dual explanation for things. First of which being that there is sort of a notion that we cannot explain all violence, we cannot explain all sociological registers, being our fundamental argument.
Why accept that we can't hope to explain the violence that the U.S. does
Because
to Iran?
there's no grammar to explain black suffering and trying to render coherence to said.
Okay, but why is the
suffering will be our
implication of
argument.
that we shouldn't try to explain the violence of U.S. military policy in the Persian Gulf?
Well, because the violence that the U.S. exports onto the Persian Gulf is based first on that political ontology of anti-blackness that is constituted by captivity.
Right, so I'm asking how that
That's
political
the first
ontology of
basis.
anti-blackness explains why we prop up the Saudis and contain the Iranians.
I think we've already answered this question. That first
By
is
saying
about whether
it's-
the
You go
how
ahead.
the U.S. has existed, that is first formed on the captivity and the enslavement of black people and the forcing of black wombs to reproduce, literally create new and more slaves to build
Okay.
up the nation state that then gave
my
power
next question-
that it exported onto other populations
Gotcha.
that were black.
So next question is about this low evidence.
Sure.
Slavery is a fundamental contradiction of U.S. history, but why is the implication of this card that we should abandon the nation state as a sort of analytical tool for understanding the world?
Sure. The last part of the card, I think, is what you should look to. It's talking about Du Bois's explanation. It did not tell the history of African American struggle as if it were exclusively a national struggle, right? Because it's not necessarily about nation states or just the U.S. entirely, but the way that it exports violence onto other places, which is why Black American struggle was situated as
So the
central
U.S.
to the
exports violence onto
Anglo-American
other places.
Empire, right?
U.S.
Empire,
exports
yeah.
violence onto other places. Why is, how does it follow from that the nation state paradigm should not be deployed as at least as an analytical
so,
tool?
Can I say one thing? You keep asking the question and Zion keeps answering, and then you answer the question again in order to prove your point that we can't explain the international state-state conflict. Our argument is your question that says, how can you explain the violence that the United States does against XYZ region proves our argument that we treat states as holistic
Okay.
and managerialist places
Gotcha.
where we move / can explain
Last
influence
question is,
through the signifiers of aggression.
You read an alternative argument
etc.
that demands an end to the entire coherence of civil society. Why does civil society need a sort of central ideological coherence to function?
Because, well, what is defined as coherent is based on what is incoherent. It's
So,
a pretty obvious concept. For there to be coherence, there has to be incoherence.
All right, prep a little. A lot of this is going to be repetitive, so I'll be kind of quick. Thanks to Joe Schatz and the Binghamton debate team for their fantastic hospitality. I think everyone's echoed that this has been an amazing tournament. Snow notwithstanding, everything from the food to the timing to the checking in on judges was just great. To Greg Rosenbaum for his amazing support of both the NDT and the Harvard team, for always being around to hit up for insider info on the Iran deal, which was pretty cool. Gary Larson for tabbing the tournament and being a stats badass. Sarah Partlow for directing the tournament and repping the legacy of Fritch better than anyone else I could imagine. Congrats to Margaret and Tyler on an outstanding debate career. They've always been one of my favorite teams to debate, and without fail, some of the hardest won and worst lost rounds I can remember. Q and Cyan, it's been a pleasure debating you all throughout the year, and I can't imagine a better pair of opponents against whom to give my final speeches. Thanks to my parents who supported me throughout high school and college, and who I'm oddly sure a lot of you have met over the years. I'm also pretty sure that they're watching now, so like, hi parents. To Jim Gentili for getting me hooked on debate for my first meeting in high school, where he interrupted a presentation by one of the seniors on our team to walk in, grab a giant silver plate off the table, and like rub it all over his stomach, screaming, "Welcome to GDS debate." All of my high school partners, including for one tournament Joe Krakoff, who we didn't get to debate here in Elims, but who I need to give a shout out to for an amazing tournament, for an amazing career, and a great friendship. Thanks to Dallas and Sherry for the constant support, both in being two of the smartest people I've ever met, and for being two sort of emotional rocks for all of college. To Dylan, Brad, Pecan, Matt, and Lundy for being the best coaches I could ask for, incredibly smart, great card cutters, super fun to hang out with and get drunk with, and formative influences on my debate and lifestyle. Thanks to Nooch, I've worked with you for longer than anyone else, and you've had a greater impact on my debate career than anyone else. Couldn't have done it without you, and sort of look forward to joining you on the other side next year. To Brad, Suo, Anna, and Dite, super happy that the 4 seniors who I kind of grew up with in college could come back for my last tournament, and they've sort of proven that my graduating class has some big shoes to fill, and they've been amazing all weekend. And finally, second to penultimately, to the rest of the team for being hella supportive: Paul, Naima, Lev, Manny, Ayush, Ali, Sam, and Priyanka. This timer just broke. And finally, thanks to He-Man. You the best. It's been a privilege and a pleasure debating with you all year, and I'm just kind of glad that we're friends. So. The order will be T. No, it'll be good. Cool. Everyone good?
The role of the ballot is to evaluate the plan versus the competitive alternative as a strategy for developing more effective explanatory critiques of oppression and violence. Scenario planning is pedagogically valuable for teaching skills like theory testing, critical reflexivity, and analytical pluralism. That's the bar evidence. It's nothing like the kind of war games the Sharp Evans talks about and is critically targeted at U.S. militarism. We're the opposite of the Powell Doctrine, and that matters there. Jones Evans about scenario planning is about Joseph Nye and smart power, which the first card in the 1EC explicitly rejects. There are 3 forms of contemporary IR scholarship will endorse and develop in novel ways in this round. Subordinated explanatory theory is an instance of emancipatory critique, which is our Jones Evans. B is analytical eclecticism and methodological pluralism, which is Blake. Or C is a focus on connecting and explaining the linkages between the domestic level and the international. Everything we say and do in this space does have the potential to spill up and stop the aggressive neocom domination of status quo policymaking, but we also don't have to win this to win. Our Jones Evans is excellent on the need to reclaim non-neutral critical concepts of objectivity in order to actualize the epistemic decolonization of international relations scholarship. False narratives like the demonization of Iran are independently bad. They justify and perpetuate imperialist violence, and breaking them down is an independently valuable thing in everyday life. They have not forwarded an alternative ethical decision criteria, which means you can't reject the 1EC's implicit focus on preventing violence and death. Saying something is unethical is not the same as forwarding a sustainable concept of what ethics is, unless their theory is able to explain literally everything in the world. Their form of anti-ethics sense of reifying inside-outside binaries and producing anti-black violence. Understanding the intricacies of politics, state, and the military is a prereq to the alternative. Brian, in 12, we need to answer this question of military logistics. What things the opposed to war machine capitalism are captured by the state, relies on supply lines, communication networks, people. What I've heard in discussion that could lead to difference in military logistics. People like to wave their hands saying this is horrible and just to believe that hand believing is politically efficacious. I can't, but saying so doesn't go very far. And check the next response to say you're justifying that system and saying it's okay. The entire point is to map the supply lines of the opposed to war machine. The breaches require your sole strategy to be ideological critique is debunked with no sir. Have been a number of bankroll critiques of state war machines without things changing too much, and the critique fails to reach the people they couldn't receive it because they expressed in the foreign language of academics. There are other causal factors that are not discursive proposition was semiotics accommodation. I don't reject the political against me aims merely wanted to get there. Part of changing the social order this necessarily involves intervening in material networks. The hardest thing requires the activist to be something more than a critic. We need good maps so we can blow up the right bridges, power lines, and communications networks. Permutation debate. The alternative does not radically break down civil society, burn anything down, or even radically escape the pull of liberal optimism. anti-humanism has been failing since the days of Nietzsche. There's no reason to expect it to succeed anytime soon. Permutation do both. Permutation we advocate the plan and demand an end to the entire coherence of civil society. Removing U.S. military presence is a necessary part of the alternative, but a total rejection of coherence makes contesting dominant narratives of oppression impossible, which is the Jones Evans floating pricks produce bad scholarship. You shouldn't allow them. Incentivizes cherry picking in tiny parts of the one you see like any word or concept. No non-arbitrary basis for competition means is infinitely regressive and unpredictable. It causes the race to the margins and destroys holistic analysis, which is bad for scholarship. There, Dylan Evans, insofar as accumulation of time is a justification for a rejection of future-oriented political engagement, it's bad. Beveridge 15 focus on the past marginalized claims of the victims of contemporary crimes. Warnings should be taken seriously. We should resist dualistic needs. The force that shoots between restitution for historical justice, struggle against justice, struggle for justice in the present or the future. We should look for types of retrospective politics that do not oppose but complement emancipatory utopian elements of the present and future-oriented politics. To dominant retrospective politics tend to have a very limited emancipatory potential. There exists of retrospective politics do not have emancipatory features. Ethical pacifism is not inherent or necessary feature. The temporal Manichaeism can be highly problematic. They misread history. Freedom has been read in opposition to slavery since ancient Greece. The Diet doesn't explain the totality of modern anti-blackness any more than Plato explains the modern republic. Their anti-humanism fails. Lester in 12 historically was not humanism, it was specifically anti-humanist songs of forging new social assumption through violence. Colonial frontiers, settler communities became established specifically through the rejection of humanist intervention. Said, we can learn from the implementation of humanist universalism practice, but we must not forget humanism's alternatives have the potential to do the same and even worse. Caribbean planetist immigrant British settlers emphasize the absence of any universal human nature, the incorrigibility of difference in upholding biological determinism. The assault on fundamental commonality has this concerning intersection with the radical critique of humanism today. Both humanism was adopted precisely to legitimate the potential extinction of the other weaker races. Both upholding and rejection can result in racially oppressive actions depending on the contingent populations of specific social assumptions. The politics of humanism was riddled with contradiction, particularly varying possibilities. It could be progressive, liberatory, dispossessive, and culturally genocidal. This should not be forgotten in the rush to condemn. It is in the tension of that self-conscious, flexible, and strategic humanism that recognizes the power-laden particularities of the male, middle-class, Western human subject resides. Their diagnosis of racism in the Rebuttal economy exposes its contingent nature. Johnson, despite the bleakness and anti-utopianism of human nature perturbed by an irreducible inner antagonism of the drive, since drives are essentially dysfunctional, subjects are able to act otherwise than as would be dictated by compelled gratification, satisfaction, and pleasure. Subject is forced to be free. A contradiction arising from the conflict internal to the Rebuttal economy mark precise spaces where freedom transcending mundane materialities to chance points to break down the deterministic nexus of the drives, clear space for a sudden emerge of something other than smooth continuation. The pain of malfunctioning Rebuttal economy is discomfort, signaling a capacity to be an autonomous subject. Humanity is free insofar as the adjournment is never absolute, exclusive. The causal focus on affect is a theoretical shortcut to avoid examining the concrete nature of politics. Grossberg, intent advocate lady off the hook, it's come to serve too often the magical term of something of acts are non-representational that we just describe it as affect. There is enough theorizing that to the harder work of specifying modalities of apparatuses of affect or distinguishing affect from the other sorts of non-somatic effects or analyzing the articulation between the ontological and the empirical. I see nothing particularly political about this. The ontological edition possibly that doesn't mean it's a description of empirical reality. Often ends up reproducing radical deterritorializing politics, too much work about affect and media effectivity on the body. Everything is getting collapsed in a general notion of affect. You don't end up having to find any specificity. The mundane horrors there sharp evidence talks about aren't reducible to one historical narrative, nor the dynamics of racial rape as sufficient explanation for all national and international oppression. This matters because we don't disagree that racial rape exists, but rather with the totalizing way it's used as an interpretive frame for politics. No single method explains everything, which proves the need for methodological pluralism, and the term ontological fatalism reifies dehumanization, reforming the condition of possibility is better. Marry it and drop the question whether U.S. culture never escape racial antagonism. The primary focus of the brief slavery remains so originally simply no precedent getting over the problem is there remains peace with the Manichaean imperative, but said in which he can only confirm the imperative as absolute rather than try to dialectical path beyond. There's no outside black social death and alienation, not so much time for presence, thought wedged to its own despair. There was always desire to have black lived experience named as worth as politics of such desire never collapsed into kind of sentimental moralism. This denial of any kind of ontological integrity to the black side does seem to reduce ontological logic, namely love, non-recuperability to correct the will to cause for a new language of abstraction, conservative expressing the structure of antagonism between blacks and humans. Reading seems to stop here. It's a mistake to limit the full speech communication insistent on the black as absolute outside can only duly reify the void at the heart of the universality. The black is beyond the limited contingency, but this beyond can only be taught violently. The very form of the reproach relies on asserting the endless non-relational absence of black reducing history and politics to of race with logic and non-relationality. The transcendentalizing of black suffering is fundamentally absolute and moralistic and effective, not intention. Don't reject progress when at 15 an odious pile of shades have been accumulating anti-racist accomplishment to reduce aside, but a massive amount so resigning that racial politics is always unstable. Racial despotism can never be fully stabilized. At key historical moments of but inevitable sheer weight becomes insupportable. Racism becomes formidable. Yet that's not the whole story. Large scale shifts have overtaken modern racial system, undermining, re-articulating during and after the war. Break occurred a seismic shift, not only civil rights but a whole range of new movements from the explicit racial despotism, racial democracy, the premise that's big like these demands, racial democratic officers. They include civil rights, anti-apartheid, and the anti-colonial movement. It also includes second wave feminist, gay liberation, and many others. Movements produce demographic, economic, political, and cultural shift, destruction of the European empires, coming and going of the Cold War, the rise of new social movements. The U.S. has only started much bigger or less. What should we be studying and teaching out of dark matter race continues, yet the legacy of resistance, the undeniable achievement, the anti-racist and anti-imperialist struggles, the extension of democracy also exerts a significant political force. Race-based freedom Jews sustain the hope of democracy, inclusion, equality, and justice. The root cause debate answering why the U.S. came into being doesn't answer why it acts the way way it doesn't fail politically unless we provide a path to getting rid of the U.S., which the alternative doesn't. It's also not just the U.S. The alt gives us no resources to critique imperialism in general, whether the U.S., Chinese, Russian, British, French, or anyone. Only the heuristic of the 1EC does that. Why does the U.S. support the Saudis and not Iran? Why did Britain have a small presence in the Gulf and the U.S. doesn't, despite the shared colonial history? Only our proximate analysis can address these questions of specificity. That's the blanker evidence. The alternative fails to account for international dynamics and essentializes blackness. Right 15, generally Afro-pessimism links all black electors across the diaspora to the experience of racism. We produce blackness as fixed identity, transcends time and space. The definition creates a dichotomy of paradox that without meaning. This threatens blacks to move across the Atlantic, but not in the same direction. Slave transferred to Europe, India, and also not retain a collective identity. This is difficult and not impossible to interpolate blackness. The black Atlantic linear narrative transnational historical conscience. There are great traits of the African diaspora studies wins over. There is a weakness. The Atlantic world remains a locus discussion. Yet, despite the horizontal reasons, qualitative collapse looms because private sustain. The history is organized horizontal relation to a vertical frame defines meaning in the struggle against racism. One could blackness to U.S. versus Afro-pessimism. This is a distinction lacking a meaningful difference. Issues the progress narrative needs linear progress to argue against progress while claiming to be Sadducees versions of Afro-pessimism. Nonetheless, doggedly track each movement in the middle passage. Epistemology stated yet again that no progress has been made. I'm going to go back up here. The alt understanding of blackness reproduces the worst reductive determinism of orthodox Marxism. Rejected. Day 15 gets a totalizing frame of Afro-pessimism and what stress the pitfalls of any anti-dialectical approach from either intentional or anti-black exceptionalism, settler, colonial, racial capitalism, not a thing but a social relation not produced with the causal relationship of the sex and puts forward this totalizing black existential frame is based on the questionable construction of epistemic privilege. No oppression reducible anti-black with the relative totality of anti-black privilege perspective from which to understand racial formation more bold than unlike a subject standby sex and the entire point seems to rest on the specificity and singularity of black critical theories capacity to understand race and privilege relies non originally binary conceptual land of bodily integrity for the same reason that economic reductions of orthodox Marxism has been discredited. The argument an argument that frames racial slavery the basis for colonial structure fails to take into account the dialects of settler colonial capitalism political economies more appropriately figures the ecology of our relation than the linear chain of events relinquishing conceptual privilege offers a useful anti-exceptional instance the colonial relation not because it is the base from which all other forms of oppression flow but the inherited background field within which market races patriarchal and state relations converge. The alternative provides no pathway for rejecting the state, which means they're just individual refusal, which means there's no sort of ethical reason to vote for anti-ethics, and it just lapses back onto a kind of circularity.
All good?
Yep.
Cool. Let's start at your role of the ballot indicates decide between planned, competitive version, etc. I'm wondering, how does this role of the ballot take into account an instance where a participant in a debate round says something like the N-word and they are not black?
I think that interrupts sort of both the competitive frame of the debate
So there are
as sort of an
instances
assault of
anti-blackness
violence
that
on
outweigh
an
the focus on the
individual,
plan.
right? So there's a difference between individual interpersonal hostility, and we can have a discussion about that, and the sort of pedagogical value of affirming and engaging in a debate about the plan.
That's
we think those
satisfactory.
operate on two different levels,
okay,
and I think that the
I'm
1AC
gonna
was
move on to my
good
next question.
regardless of that
Is that
possibility.
okay, Herman?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Your Brian evidence, you say understanding intricacies of the state, government, etc. is key to the alternative. If black people knew more about how the state functions, would BLM work?
So there's an interesting question here, which is what is BLM targeted targeted at, and what does
Do black
work
people
mean?
not
And
know
what does-
enough about the state?
No, and what does work mean? It's not just knowing enough about the state. It's knowing enough about the state in the context of particular things.
Okay,
I
so
don't
do
think,
black people
so
not know
I
enough
don't
about the
think
state
that
in
the
the
reason
context of
why
particular things?
I don't think that the reason why BLM is working or failing is dependent on knowledge about the state. But
Okay,
I do
then
think
I
the
was-
reason why.
Okay, so tag
But
up
I
your Brian
do think
evidence,
the reason
or
why-
your Brian evidence, not going for it then.
That's
okay,
not
cool.
what I said.
No,
I
tag
think
the
that the
Brian evidence was
is
learning more,
absolutely
the
essential for
alternative. You just
breaking
rejected
down the
that
state
claim. Cool.
and
I'm going to move on.
Okay, it's not it's also not just about like
I'm
knowing
moving
about
on.
the state.
Okay, let's get this debate started early. What examples will you point to for why things are getting better?
Massive demographic and socioeconomic shifts. There's far less sort of.
What were those due to?
Huh?
Like, what changed those?
A variety of different things: mass migration out of the South, the end of slavery, the end of formal Jim Crow, the introduction of sort of
Okay,
what
prison industrial
Gwinnett calls
complex,
racial,
etc. More
democracy,
black
which
people
is
are
still.
killed today than were killed during Jim Crow. How do each of these
So
like small progressions
that's sort of
outweigh
a red
those
that's sort of
contemporary
a
events?
red herring because population has increased. It's not just a matter of numbers, right? We're not saying that things are perfect right now. We're saying that there have
Okay,
been
so
noticeable improvements, and it happens in fits and
percentages
starts.
of black people killed means that it's contingent.
Well, we have a variety of other arguments about contingency that I think are not dependent on percentages, and that's incredibly reductive. But
Well,
the
you just said
totalizing
body
argument
count,
that nothing
so-
can ever improve in a material sense is just wrong historically.
Okay, so what examples?
Again, I said there's far less violence related to certain things
Right, and you just
than
said
there
that
was
that
in the
was
past,
reductive,
and those
so
are
what
improvements.
examples?
Well, I said that was reductive as a response to your contingency argument, which is dependent on the theoretical framing of what blackness is ontologically,
Alright,
which
we're
we
not getting
answered
anywhere.
separately.
Moving
but
on. You're
progress is
right.
possible, and that is one
I'm
example of it.
moving
There's
on.
also the okay.
Okay. You're right evidence about how we essentialize blackness. I'm wondering what is the difference between how the U.S. perceives black people who live in the U.S. and black people in the international community?
The sort of black Atlantic narrative and slavery doesn't explain sort of all oppression everywhere in places like Europe, Asia.
That doesn't answer the question. Cool.
It does.
remember in high school debate watching finals of the NDT and deciding that I was not going to be the person who talked for really long because obviously we wanted to watch the debating. After debating last year in CETA finals and doing a similar conversation, I realized, in fact, how important it is to thank everybody and have a conversation about sort of, telling everybody how grateful we are for where we are, how we are, and debate is an accumulation of everybody that we're around in the process and the conversations that we have and the people who motivate us to come to other tournaments. First and foremost, I'd like to thank you with my A1 from the day one, Wilderson, Joy James, Hartman, who have consistently, since literally 8th grade, defined my relationship to debate. I'd like to thank my mom for sending me incredible messages throughout the tournament, none of which are useful, but how to dye your hair in your own bathroom, etc., 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 and insisting I respond on time or else I must be sick. I would like to remind Chris Carey that he had an amazing career and we're happy that he debates for KU, and we're so grateful that we had the opportunity of having such an amazing captain who truly loves and cares about us. I wanted to say I really do respect Krakoff and Morgan. The last debate that we just had sort of explains some of the more powerful conversations I think that we can have with debate. Andy and Suzanne, who helped me with administration functions and important things like that, including my scholarships. My family in general, my amazing sister who's preggo and we can't wait to see the baby. I'm baby crazy but don't want them. I would like to thank Harris for bringing me to KU and making sure that I had the opportunity to not only debate but go to college. The coaching staff at large, Scion for debating with me this year. This year I did not know before the season who I was going to debate with for an incredibly long time. Scion was my saving grace, came in to debate with me, has dealt with my absurd habits, one of which being not being able to save documents, not being able to use the restroom until decisions are made because I can't wash my hands until I do such, etc. The absurd amount of karmic relationships I have to debate that Scion has to deal with on an everyday basis. Jaleesa for giving me the emotional support in order to come to debates and engage with these conversations. Nicole for providing for me the best thing that Nicole has done is provided a different way of conceptualizing debate. I'm a very top-down approach. I like to say things in a certain way, and she changed the way I view debate, and I'll always thank her for that. I want to thank Allie for being both an amazing, first an amazing argumentative coach, but more importantly, not more importantly, I just have never had a coach who's both an emotional help and also just as helpful argumentatively, and I will always be grateful for that. Sean Kennedy, I think probably people here know that Sean defines sort of my relationship to debate beginning in high school to this moment. He's always been supportive of me, always wanted to make me a better debater, absolutely absurd person who rips out his own hair, but I can say that he was genuinely so proud for us to be here that he cried, and I'm so grateful. Banky for coming all the way from Texas when he's not even at KU just to come help us out because he loves us that much. Eisenstadt for lending me this balling-ass jersey, which I'm assuming is what got me to this moment. Emily for lending me her Unicorn Tears lipstick. I'm pretty sure that's what helped us through ELIMS. One person I'd like to thank in particular is Willie. Willie believes in me before a lot of other people in debate did, provided me with hope/relationship to debate. I remember my first college tournament, he posted a status about me that I was going to get somewhere. I just remember it meaning the world to me because at that moment I was like, Jaleesa, so good, I'm so young, I hope that this all works out. And he really reminded me that I have potential within myself. Iggy, Shanera, Amber, I would like to thank each of them individually, particularly Iggy. You have shown me so much love, care, support every time I'm having a bad day. You're always there to help me out. And I don't mean that in a debate way. I mean that in an everyday love kind of way. The type of stuff that makes you realize what true friends in debate are for. Shanera for being brilliant, setting a model, being that model, giving me someone to love, look up to. Amber for just being amazing. I don't know, you're just a badass in every way, realm of life. You tell me how to change the world, how to think about the world, and that's important. And I know that the speech sounds weird to y'all, but I do think it's important to everybody else too who has to hear them. I want to thank Marquise. Marquise pushes me. He's my fucking arch nemesis, but he pushes me to think about things in a way that I would not conceptualize, to push the limits and confines of my theoretical understanding on a daily basis. Kane for being the smartest person I know to this day, and I'll always love and care about you, and I will always think that you shape my relationship to this activity and debate. Hank, Preston's my boyfriend, but also my side debate coach, who reminds me all the time of the words I already know, but reminds me to say them because it is actually something I often forget not to do. Hank for always sending me weird Baudrillard/Pomo cards. Emma, my high school debate partner, lover. Kendall, my best friend. She's really amazing. She's probably cheering/crying at home. Okay, and then the last few things I'll say. I'm a true believer where we are, how amazing it is and shocking that we're here, how amazing it is as a sophomore, but I also want to take a minute to just say that it's not a process of myself, it's a cumulative process of people who give me the energy to be here. Amina, Corey, Troy, Brittany, Nicole, Vita, Jaleesa, and Jalisa. I just want to say thank you and I love you. I want to say thank you to Kevin for reminding me how to be sassy, telling me when to end cross-sex, when they're not going to give me the answers I want. Opponents, He-Mans, and Herman, you've been my arch nemesis of the season, and I'm grateful that we're having this debate, regardless of intent. I'm glad that we ended it with a rivalry. And I want to thank a couple of these judges, specifically the ones who've had a direct impact on my career, remind me every day to get better. I want to make clear that this panel that we've chosen isn't by mistake. There are people here who have voted me down quite a bit, actually, and I thank you for that because it shaped me into a better debater. Beginning last year, T-Cram telling me that my arguments were there, but I needed to figure out how to frame them, and I swear I sat with Sean for like 2 hours and was like, I don't think you're getting that I don't know how to phrase things. Turner, I want to thank you for reminding me / re-reminding me every time that I think I'm correct about the way that I'm saying everything, that I am in fact not saying real words, and should ground them in my own theory and explain them again. Phil, I wanted to thank you in particular. I don't think you realize how much emotional energy you give me, not only me, but our coaches, and my relationship to you. I'm always grateful that you're honest, on point, and tell me how it is. When I fuck up, you're not afraid to say it. Hearn, I appreciate your relationship to me / this activity. I think that every time you judge me, you give it your full shot, and I've never seen you judge a debate without all your might. Renier, I've only had you once this year, but you gave me hell of a decision, and you really did try and help me out in future debates. And so, with that, I will begin. It'll be the methods page and then the critique.
No card?
No.
Cool.
Well, maybe. Probably not then. Okay. America is a family, and anti-blackness is patriarchy. The affirmative focus on international relations takes the household for granted, treats it a basic unit of politics. Their examination found the house in Iraq with one another, trades off an analysis of the everyday intimate violence of anti-blackness that occur within the household of America itself. Their criticism of military presence is not only insufficient, it reproduces the unconsensual relationship of the racial rape forced upon black women, only displacing the grammar geopolitics. You recognize the real relations of violence within the household. The issue with the scenario planning as it continues. The discussions already exist in the political sphere that we've already won. These conversations guarantee blackness cannot be included in political because conversations about anti-blackness are always overshadowed the next immediate life-threatening demand over international organizations. These discussions glaze over the everyday intimate violence, close off possibility for possible black political imagination against invest all political power of the existing institution relationship various countries distract from the everyday violence happening to black people and things like the prison industrial complex often for us everyday gratuitous violence towards black people, motive and evidence impacts us, and all which I'll read in a second says that this form of government mentality is what is a tactic. Policing trains us to be night riders to engage in policy making, plan policy. We're just every not only in terms of the government policy, but all forms of sociality. That's experts, neoliberal, academic labor. We plan to produce for the university. Everyone's on patrol. It trains us to regulate our own engagement to export these apparatus of policy throughout the social world, making black political imagination impossible. They literally make this true when they read their evidence about training students to understand international relations. There's another scenario planning. Global politics tells us to improve ourselves when we're already fucking great. The self-defense of the revolution is confronted not by the brutalities, but also the false image of closure, the hard materiality that we must be fixated, that we're always surrounded. There's a huge problem with the affirmative relationship to the alternative, the universal. We withdraw our military presence. The United States withdraws their military presence. All of these units for analysis assume that the military presence out of the Persian Gulf, that we as people in America, some universal national identity is false. Black people do not exist within the national understanding of the U.S. maintain autonomy as actors within democratic deliberation, but rather cannot be included because there's no grammar to make sense of black suffering. International relations are a bad starting point for politics because homogenized American sentiment, and demand ignores that there's no black nation, which means literally black people, and white people think the United States can never use international relations to resolve the anti-blackness. You suture a country that can't be sutured. Obviously, we clarify we shouldn't be in a country because it's racist, a logical causal reaction, but it can't be because we remove that military presence and burden on the affirmative to explain how this understanding relations can resolve black violence for black folks. What material things can explain that for black people that could remove a stigma attached to skin? What policy could one pass that would stop white anxiety and gratuitous violence towards black skin? How does one change the opinions of those who integrate violence for black people? What does that mean? What does that look like? The burden is on them when they push optimistic rhetoric into the debate to explain how those textures interact with themselves. It's not just one EXC. At this point, they've proven that through all of their arguments about optimism, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all of their arguments about how we can change the world is ever fixated, that we're ahistorical. All of those things should frame and predetermine the sociological register in which they export to the world of permanent evidence. Self-reflexive scenario planning indicates at some point foreign policy could understand minority voiceless only if conversations were more diverse, more deliberative, and more democratic. The United States could change its relationship to Iran. Also, this card says the thing about the thing about scenario she's talking about is when we imagine alternative worlds not operating in linear chains of event outside of normal predictions. They're making a normative prediction that we say in Persian Gulf. We will go to war. Their evidence talks about the way that the states operate, but then also the way the nation operates. The grammar that the United States uses for international relations is predicated off of an antagonistic, not an agonistic relationship to black folk. Grammar such as democracy and productivity. This is proven in cross-ex when I ask what are the analytic such grammars we use to export to other places, aggressive or he says either aggressive or one that maintains that they are not being productive enough or that they are legitimate. All of these things require and resuture that things operate on the sociological register in order to export them to other social realms. So the way that we explain / export to violence on the external level operates at the level of the quotidian before that violence can be exported. The internal violence / intimate violence that defines interpersonal relations then gets exported to the sociological realm. It's not a question of do they think rape good, bad. Our argument is much more complex than that. Our evidence indicates that one, you have to start at a politic of captivity to have any chance of resolving anti-blackness, that it can't operate at the level. The material must be a combination of the material of linguistic economies to explain anti-blackness, which was an argument I'll get to on the whatever the fuck social death debate. Okay. They say the role of the ballot is who best has the best explanatory power to explain violence. They're conceding our argument that there is no explanatory power to explain violence. Their demand for coherence / what comes next / how do we solve the affirmative is our fucking argument that it's not a question of do we solve your affirmative. You don't fucking solve your affirmative. You indicate that in cross-ex. You say that it's a question of the model and the model that scenario planning in which you can export. Cross-ex is embarrassing. He says he can't export this model of neoliberal logic, then says later in the speeches that it's all about the particular. It's all about the certain instantiation of violence. It's important that we understand violence in its sociological register. Our argument is it's obviously not, and it's co-constitutive of violence. This is proven by evidence that they read, which indicates that it's predicated off of a colonial history, one that one cannot be separated / divorced from all impact from their rhetoric of colonization. But it's also important to realize that the affirmative says that there's no way that we can use one theory to export to another, but all of their evidence seems to indicate the opposite, that there is a logic / structure of, it's not a question of can we explain violence / a theory to explain violence, but there are structures that predetermine the theories that we engage with, which is why the alternative says that it has to be framed from an analytic of captivity and anti-blackness before we have any chance of theorizing what violence is happening upon the body. Their answer to the sharp evidence is just terrible. Not answered very well. He says it's not linked to the affirmative because we have to analyze the spherical relationship. This evidence indicates that intimate violence predetermined state is state international relations. The Jones evidence definitely says to reject the affirmative, definitely says to reject the affirmative. They indicate that it criticizes the first line of their evidence. The Jones evidence indicates that his theory and logic requires one of pushing hegemonic dominance. It's not a question of do you reject somebody else, it's a question of what their model promotes. Their next argument is that the domestic shapes the international and the international shapes the domestic. I'm calling a false They're saying it's a false trade-off. I'm saying it's definitely our low evidence is incredibly specific about the way that there's a trade-off when we have to talk about the things that suture violence before we talk about the ways that it's exported globally. Our argument is not domestic, international, as if there's an ontological difference between them, but rather your choice to focus on the international as for you to divorce your own bodies, to engage in conversations that distance yourself from the lived reality of the people in the debate. Argument is not that international things don't matter, but rather they're shaped by politics, conversations, social relations that happen in debate. If that's not true, then if that is true, then we'll win other arguments. If that's not true, it just shows why operating at the level of the sociological register is violent for black people, because it assumes that conversations we have can overdetermine the coherence of debate. Their next argument is the ethics of anti-ethics. I don't think they know what the fuck Wilderson means. Our argument is that ethics are constitutively defined in contrast to blackness. Not that we're anti-ethics. I'm not anti-anything. I'm not fucking 2 Chainz. Our argument is that blackness is ontological and rendered derelict. Henceforth can't be created in terms of relation. The Bryan evidence says that cannot resolve the fact that black skin is marked as criminality, means that demands and being read as hand waving. We're going to impact her in this Bryan evidence because it indicates that when people make demands that are not constitutive of the state, they're seen as hand waving, which is what happens in things like BLM. People are marked as apolitical because the United States gets to render those voices apolitical. Say you need more specific demands. Our argument is that's the way black people's relationship to government, such governmentality works. Their next argument is a human. I think I already explained how I'm not anti-human. Our argument is we transcend beyond humanism. Their next argument is holistic arguments bad. Holistic arguments important on the framework argument. That just proves all of our arguments that it can't be about a particular situation, but a holistic interpretation of the affirmative, and the justifications for the affirmative means not a question of can you weigh the affirmative against the alternative, because the model set you export to the sociological sociological world is bad. They said the libidinal economy can't be proven. I'm not fucking Lacan. Argument is not the libidinal economy the way they interpret it, but rather that there is no other explanatory power to explain the why a 12-year-old gets shot for holding a toy gun, why Miley Cyrus likes to twerk on black women, why white women like to touch black women's hair. Argument is not that it's not falsifiable, rather there is a current political economy that's shaped by anti-blackness. Does not mean that black people don't have agency, but instead that agency is commodified by civil society. The myriad evidence just proves all their arguments about how they say we can't start from a moment of dereliction. When dereliction in captivity defines blackness, it's weird for them to weaponize this evidence against us because it flows negative.
What evidence do you have for the ontological status of blackness? Not in terms of a card, but like what's the sort of epistemological support for the ontological claim?
I don't know what you mean by epistemological. The ontological argument is that the way that civil society / anti-blackness has been constitutively defined, one that requires blackness to be derelict in order to render other bodies coherent.
I get what the argument is. I'm wondering what evidence you have for it. Is it based on purely a reading of history?
I think
if
I
so,
read like 9 minutes of
which
evidence in the 1 and C. If you're asking me what our theory means, I can answer
Well,
your question.
so almost
if you're
all of
asking
your
me
evidence.
If I can point to one piece of evidence that defines anti-blackness as ontological, I would say
No,
the
so
1 and C.
well, so the evidence is based on sort of a the evidence gives a narrative description of what happened during the transatlantic slave trade and slavery, and then asserts an ontological claim. I'm wondering what's the basis for that? Is it based on sort of the lived experience of blackness? Is it based on historical analysis? What's it based on?
No, our argument is that through sort of like so from the middle passage, blackness reduced to dereliction means that the technologies that exploit black people have changed, but we cannot fall prey to the idea that there is not a reason why black people are always being shit on. We cannot change the fact that there is an anxiety mark to
I get
black
that maybe
skin.
maybe a historical reading of
I
the
do not
changes
think you
in
have, no, it's not historical.
No, that's what I'm saying. I get your argument that maybe a historical reading can't disprove it, but then what is it based on itself? How do you know?
No, I don't think that I just said that. I think I explained that. I think there is no other explanatory power for explaining the relationship between black people in the world.
But you said there was no explanatory power, there's no coherence, and we said proximate explanations are good, and you said proximate explanations are bad, so what's the argument for your explanation?
Right. So Wilderson says that the ontological structure of anti-blackness is shaped by 3 things: natal alienation, general dishonor, and gratuitous violence.
What the argument is. That, okay, sure, that's based on Patterson's historiography of slavery. Is that the
No,
argument?
I disagree that it's predicated off of Patterson's historical reading of slavery.
So to extend
and also it's not predicated off of a notion of slavery. The notion of
to
social
extend
death is
your
the inability
metaphor
to
of the
transcend
household,
political activity
what
to
is
the rest of the world.
why should we ethically prioritize the household over whatever occurs outside the household, whether that's
that
America
your idea
or
of
whether that's
ethics
literally
is
the
our
home?
problem. your idea that the app is a more ethical approach because we provide a more
Well,
material situation.
Well, then
is
how do we
unbelievable.
ever choose between competing forms of action? What's the criteria for deciding between two things?
The criteria for deciding between two things, the ones that we've sutured in this debate, is one that begins from a captive flesh that defines sociological
Well, that is
relationships
ethics,
like you.
right? No one says ethics is universal. Ethics is just a decision criteria for two
No,
courses
it's
of
not a
action.
dis-
Why should we prefer that ethics over the affirmative's ethics?
Because the affirmative ethics is only rendered coherent by ours. So you
But that
render
sort of
yours-
lapses back on this epistemological question that you really haven't answered.
Which is what? I think
How-
you keep
why?
using broad
Why
terms
choose
that,
that
don't explain
ethics?
The critique, so that's your fucking fault for asking.
If
me a
your
question
argument
like
is
that.
only that your ethics is somehow more explanatory or
No,
required,
it's not. Our ethics is more
then that begs the
explanatory.
question
Our
of
argument
whether
is that
anything can be coherent.
Our reading shapes your reading. There's a difference between more explaining and shapes
Okay,
your
got it.
interpretation / your act progress.
Okay.
Hold on. Anyone ready?
The rule of the ballot represents the best grammar capable of resisting anti-black violence. Debate is not a question of if the plan is good or bad. Their affirmative was not 15 seconds of reading a plan and then sitting down. The justification for their plan is just as important as the conclusion itself. Simply put, it is not enough to do the right thing for the wrong reasons. It's a question of sequencing. Our method comes before you evaluate the plan and the ethicality of the plan. Even if the plan is good in a vacuum, the grammar that they've used to explain violence replicates the unconsensual position of the black woman in the position of racial rape, which in fact the planning guarantees that it is parasitic upon blackness. Now, the right evidence, it does not link. We know that African black people don't have the same experience of natal alienation, but even the African who was not captured was still a slave in relation to the rest of the world. They must prove that the particularities of black experience means that the U.S. acts towards them in different ways, when we always know that ontologically the U.S. acts towards people in black people who are in the U.S. the same as black people who are international, i.e. that they are all thugs, criminals, etc. marked as derelict. Yes, we know that Somalians or Kenyans are New Yorkers, but that they are still linked by connection to anti-blackness that was homegrown in the U.S. and then exported globally. Now the Lester evidence, it is not in the context of James's conception of anti-humanism through the black cyborg. Settler colonialism does not explain the position of blackness. Sexton in 14. Smith rightly argues the race designation of native people is as free person is not a privilege because the civilizing mission is a form of genocide. Yet what is missing? The colonization, not such a mostly less prerequisite to enslavement. This would enslavement is conversion person improper would simply be an instrument form of colonization. Colonization not necessary condition of enslavement, but slaves need not be colonial subjects or object colonial exploitation, settler colonial genocide. The crucial problem formulation has to do with the drive to confound the position of blacks in order to describe them as exploited and colonized to consider as reduction of slavery, the exploitation of labor, mark after exploitation of labor. And even if we do not go for the alternative, we have linear descents to the app that aren't resolved by a combination of the advocacies. Now they don't get a permutation. One, we should add advocacies to standards in which we can test them as production of scholarship and whether that scholarship is valuable. Simply put, they shouldn't get points for being good enough and saying violence bad. Second, it forces blackness to compromise and flinch for whiteness. Even if they win that some part of the app is good, the perm eliminates the revolutionary potential of the alternative in favor of a kinder, gentler anti-blackness. Third, it is the replication of whiteness. A perm is co-option because it steals all of the structural analysis and labor that the black woman has done in this space to say that we're not that bad. This is a definition of using choosing black labor for white gain. Now, ontology debate. Ontology should come first. If we win, that ontology is a prior question, and the perm is irrelevant because it means that, one, the app is asked the wrong question, and second, it also means that any permutation is intrinsic because they have retroactively added an analysis, so it's not present in the one you see. Ontology fundamentally is a question of being, which means that it's an inescapable component of everything. The app relies on an unanswered question of ontology. They do not question what it means to be in the world, which is where we start our analysis. Action presupposes a particular account reality that predetermines available solutions. Bryant in 15. Ontology is general theory what it gives a means to give an account of something where psychiatrists prescribe standards of presupposing ontology that the cause of anxiety, neurological, chemical, imbalance, variant, and materialist ontology. Ontology influences practice and also influences research. No, escaping ontology, nor is there a single utterance and not making ontological presupposition critiquing them. Here's the possibility of improving both inquiry and practice. If we win, then ontology comes first. They do not get to weight their app because all of their impacts assume an ontological question that has not been answered. Now the role of the neg is to criticize the app's ontology. If we win, then ontology is first. That means that any permutation fails because it includes bad ontology or disseverance, which is a voting issue that I'll get to later. This debate is not about who best catalyzes movements of policy, but about who presents the best analytic for explaining anti-blackness. If we win, then their description of blackness is problematic. That precedes the question of policy efficacy and calls into question their ability to solve any of the app. Now, perm to both is specifically harmful because it means that any negative strategy will be able to be absorbed by the app rather than actually investing the time to discuss which strategy is best. Perm advocate the plan and demand anti-coherence of civil society is wow, both severance and intrinsic. They sever out of their justifications for the plan and their insistence on scenario planning while adding on the demand to end civil society's coherence. That is voting issue makes it impossible to garner stable aims because the app is a moving target. They did not just read the plan text for 15 seconds and say they were ready for cross-sex. The reps and justification of the plan matter and can't be removed. Now, a couple of dissets. First is cruel optimism. The app's encouragement for black people to put demands on the government. They emphasize the small successes that black people have acquired while ignoring how BLM, Ferguson, and Baltimore all tried to make demands on the government but were met with violence, which means that even if the app isn't forcing of black people to invest in the government, they created a cruel optimism for black people to engage with the state, even if doing so will almost certainly mean that they will be met with tear gas, arrested en masse, or shot on sight. Also, this is a paternalistic idea because they insist that black people learning more about the state, about its intricacies, is what meant that BLM wasn't effective in the first place, when no, it is the ontological nature of anti-blackness within civil society. Now, second is futurity and institutional reform. Reliance on reformulation of U.S. policy makes the perm impossible. They should be holding to their reps and evidence after realizing the presumption that we should reorient our knowledge production to make us better members of a democratic polity, which is impacted by Hartman and Dillon evidence politics, and who can access it is denied by what it is not, slave and free. Now, third is weaponization. Even if progress is possible, they utilize history in order to resist black liberation projects and reduce them within civil society. Use of historical events to disprove the necessity for black liberation's fungibility of blackness, and is the reason why anti-blackness is so permanent, that they insist that it's not that bad and that black people are just being over-dramatic, i.e. the utilization of MLK and civil rights to contest their particular choices of movements like BLM and Ferguson for being too rowdy and acting like thugs. Now, specific examples of why legal reform does not work in the case of Eric Garner. Even when police were forced to wear body cameras, his murderer still got off, and they literally arrested the person who filmed his murder, which is a reason why even if there's institutional reform, there's always a villain, which means that the worst form of their argument is black people being shit on, and the best form of their argument is that white people do give a shit, care about environmental issues, but after black people have already been negatively affected. Now, their use of diasporic model of knowledge reduction reproduces anti-blackness filtration in 9. Difference between a sentient being whose position of being in the world with one is position of the thing of the one marks the scale of the body to diaspora, agential, optimism, language, migration, essential, opposed to important elements in analysis, performance, and global blackness, such assumes a grammatical analogy among diaspora systems. They are haunted by saying the lingers of the word homeland cannot be reconciled with Africa. Diaspora viability of such grammatical entity falters in base of Africa because of Africa's short-term term for technology force the robust pronouns and placing their integrity what makes the word diaspora analogous to translatable among races and cultures. This analogy is the root and applies to Africa. Or after applied to Africa.
I'll send the card out now.
Yeah.
Good to go? Good? Cool. The rule of the ballot is self-serving and arbitrary. You should instead choose the team who has a better method of providing balance. There are a couple of dissets to their method, which are net benefits ours. First is scenario planning is key to deconstruct cognitive biases and act on imperfect information, which is necessary for the scalability and exportability of any political strategy. Even the alternative second, it requires the valid set of the social, which only serves dominant groups. The app specifically intervenes in the construction of Iran as innately aggressive, which is a strategic framing that results in containment and war. Our Bryant evidence applies this to military logistics and says that detailed analysis is key to understand military violence and the resources that we have on hand and challenging. It's not obviously a one-to-one correlation between a debate and passing a plan, but ideas do matter, and or intervention is good. We're not saying that you're apolitical if you don't do this, but it's a question of how best to challenge violence. All of these are net benefits to methodological pluralism. We combine different methods that are deemed incompatible. There's no single starting point, so you should draw on many different bodies of scholarship to explain the world and strategize how to change it. This is an impact turn to the idea that the critique is competitive, otherwise it results in esoteric, restricted scholarship that can't scale up to change the alternative. Sort of relies on the same communal deliberative methods, i.e. everybody sort of rejects or understands that civil society should collapse or is fundamentally incoherent, but however, even though it draws on the same deliberative methods, this artificially limits out a detailed analysis of the Persian Gulf, which is the net benefit of the permutation. The app uses many theories, culture, identity, critiques of colonialism, realist thought, etc., which proves we are methodological pluralism. There's no trade-off between analyzing everyday violence or racial rapes and the international system. No one method could explain all of those things, which is why there's no forced choice, but you shouldn't universalize any forced method, any single method, or assume that it explains all of these phenomena. That doesn't lead to distancing. If the implications that we can't talk about stuff that's directly relevant to us, that is a bad thing, because analyzing the connections between the domestic and the international is a good thing, specifically in the context of the one you see Taylor 16. There's a racist feedback loop in which domestic and foreign policies feed and reinforce each other. Use foreign policy in the Middle East reverberated home, cynical use of Islamophobia support, and eventually becomes the pretext for greater police suppression. Home in the late 1990s, a movement came to stop racial profiling movements. Momentum offers dramatically cut short in the aftermath of 9/11. No longer subject to federal investigation, became legitimate, widely supported, nor only was developing struggle against racism, buried down a wave of Islamic racism, but the focal point of anti-racist struggle was not being championed as a necessary tool. If we win, the fatalism link-term proves they can generate uniqueness for the distancing. Just said, we're not governmentality. We don't require that you have a plan, but theorizing about the state is an analytic object with privileged access to powers necessary to accurately map the world. Scenario planning doesn't tell people how to improve themselves. Obviously, the opinion argument. We don't require. You don't identify with U.S. national identity or abandon analysis, but that doesn't mean that you should abandon analysis of nation states, because IR is a traditionally state-dominated field. The one you see does not need to solve all the cultural textures that they critique bad that results in a bad form of politics. You should throw out everything until the end of racism finally arrives. The one you see doesn't expand or force productivity on other countries. In fact, if anything, the one you see is a critique of aggressive democracy promotion or control of the Persian Gulf. What is the alternative? Effective refusal fails. They've considered the Grossberg evidence that it substitutes for a material and political change that comes from a rigorous causal analysis of simply saying no or calling for disorders actively bad. Pure negativity and incoherence only allows neoconservative coherent narratives to fill the void. They also can't articulate a sustainable ethic upon which ground politics, which stymies any potential movement. The permutation debate. Permutation do the planet endorse complete disorder and permutation do both. We do get a permutation ski to combine and test different methods. We don't force compromise, but we do encourage tailoring and refinement. It's not co-option. That relies on an idea of speech as intellectual property. We can add an analysis, obviously, because otherwise it would result in links of omission and plan debates, which make debate literally impossible. The ontology Bryant evidence they read is silly, because ontology is just a question of what is. Everything is in to some extent ontology, but totalizing readings of ontology are bad, which is why you should favor contingency. The scenario planning link, it's not unique. What does giving up hope do? It results in the same type of response. There's no impact of cruel optimism other than psychic violence, but we're not, our one is not a critique of internal pessimism or survival strategies. Hope is good for political organization and managing inter-subjective relations. It's not paternalism. We're not saying black people are ignorant about the state, but instead, this argument doesn't answer the validity of the one method in challenging violence. The institutional reform argument is not necessary. The one to see our analysis is still good for navigating the terrain of the social. The wine and evidence answers this. Things are still an odious pile of racist shit, but they're a smaller pile that's meaningful when they're going for a politics of refusal and incoherence. Eric Garner's affectively compelling example, but it doesn't prove the safety and net improvement over time. Jim Crow was worth in the sheer amount of intensity of violence against black people than the contemporary racial democracy. Demographic shifts, increases in socioeconomic mobility, representation of the political system are all the results of political organizing, and they matter. The status quo is not perfect, but it doesn't disprove the necessity of organizing like Black Lives Matter. However, it does disprove their ontological claims. The history link, we didn't say racism. Instead, we're impact turning their specific liberation strategy. The libidinal economy / ontology debate. The Sexton evidence is the exact argument. RT evidence is impact turning. There's no coherent epistemological basis for differentiating and subordinating both settler colonialism and capitalism to anti-blackness, because that reduces the complex ecology of power to a reductive determinism that replicates the worst flaws of orthodox Marxism. It's based on a conflation of the structural position and embodied experience. It transforms ideological superstructure into material reality. It reifies the objection of blackness as ontological truth, which is results in a totalizing, authoritarian, and violent form of politics which maps the proximate critique of political economy necessary to fight anti-blackness. Wilderson is wrong because you can't base a foundational antagonism for all global suffering on one national narrative and one historical experience, which is why there's no root cause of the case. Anything less totalizing doesn't give you a reason why acting to reduce proximate causes of suffering isn't good. This means you should be skeptical of their political prescriptions, collapsing multiple grammars down to a single ontological truth, brackets out large swaths of oppression, which is why you should err affirmative and treat the debate like a modified form of Pascal's wager. Any risk Wilderson is wrong means accepting his analysis reifies anti-blackness forever instead of destabilizing it. They need to conclusively prove ontological fixity to win their argument. Our argument on libidinal economy wasn't that you are Lacan, but instead the incoherence of the libidinal economy. That the argument depends on proofs of contingency of anti-blackness dynamic contradictions and tensions at the core of our desires to make them malleable and vulnerable to both change and critique. The humanism debate, the anti-humanism they deployed, their sex and evidence doesn't get them out of Volink or Lester. Evidence says that anti-human politics based on the presumption of essential difference results in some of the worst atrocities in history's affect. I extended the affect argument above. The time length, the 1AC, is sensitive to how history changes, but also how it rhymes. It accounts for cumulative tendencies, but an exclusive past focus locks us into a fatalist politics without the potential for emancipatory strategy. Our beverage evidence is the conceded impact turn to their alternative. Anything else? Beverage.
How much go back?
theory, military presence, bad argument is your attachment to scenario planning, but extends beyond the debate. It doesn't matter that you do the right things for the wrong reasons. Not a question. Military presence, good or bad. They concede a sequence in question. Should the United States exist as an entity to remove themselves from the equation? Prove by them saying they're anti-state, not realizing we're anti-you, and your belief within the existing theory. Our argument impact on all their arguments about scenario planning indicates even if scenario planning is good in this unique situation, it's exported to the model of all social political realms. Our argument is this is good because it allows us to have a theory from which we can relate to proves all of our arguments about their refusal / their dogmatism, their refusal, all of their arguments about the alternative doesn't allow for what does to understand what comes after the world is super. I'll get to that a little bit later, but our argument that they haven't answered, which is their model, proves that their existing world will remain true because all of the arguments about how it's necessary, sufficient, how the state is inevitable, how things are inevitable, how these are inevitable social relations that we have to move, fixate, reshape, change, prove all of our arguments about the faith of the affirmative within existing structures, which I'll get to a little bit on the criticism. There are two ways of reviewing the alternative. First, the debate is a question that grammar and understanding politics. If we win, their method is parasitic upon blackness. In order to make sense of the world, you should vote negative because their pedagogical practice in the debate is necessarily violent, contains the filters that cannot resolve against some assumptions of their starting point. Even if their scenario planning can be effective, just in some cases it actively crowds out black structural positionality. It crowds out the structural positionality of black women. Second alternative offers more niches and analytic for understanding politics. The violence is involved for fronting intimate relations of anti-black activity rather than starting with geopolitics as abstract categories like nation states, maroonage treats, global political economy as a byproduct of anti-blackness. U.S. empire exported throughout the globe. Granted, everyday racial antagonism against black women. This is a low and sharp evidence that I don't think is well answered in the 1A. We'll preempt the 2A argument of how anti-blackness cannot explain all violence. They say anti-blackness cannot explain all violence. That's obviously not our argument. There's a unique position of blackness in captivity, that dereliction that forms a basis for the United States national identity. Their politics focuses on interstate violence and is incapable of grappling with ongoing role of captivity, anti-black violence constituting U.S. national identity. We don't have to win that. We can explain all violence in order to win the central act with the affirmative advantage U.S. empires produce and maintain through anti-black violence as a result of their method is parasitic upon anti-blackness. If we win our link arguments about the method that the evidence describes the affirmative is incapable of dealing with blackness itself means that their analysis will inevitably be incomplete and always forced and preoccupied with dealing with the realities of anti-blackness will lead to a hamster wheel of scenario planning for scenario planning without liberation for black people. Not only does their analysis not explore racial rape and intimate violence as parasitic upon everyday intimate violence that constitutes the very basis for the grammar of their politics to be articulated. The 2AR says, the 1AR has no answer to our James evidence indicates that focus on the public trades off with everyday intimate violence. Not a question of does the AF talk about intimate relations. The fact that they talk about how the state is negatively affecting certain people, how they realize that the state is negative for certain people, obfuscates their relationship to that violence, says that we need to put pressure on the state, assumes redeemability within their own bodies while explaining the way that their relationships shape and predetermine the policy in which they think is a good idea, which proves all of our arguments about sequencing. You don't know what is true until you know that you've decided that you want to do it. Argument is we've impacted on the affirmative notion of scenario planning is a good idea because it engages in conversations of international relations, allows reporters, the policy debaters to export violence internationally and then assume that their bodies do not gain coherence from those arguments. This is conceded in a link that does not get answered in the 2AR. They also conceded our futurity arguments. Dillon's evidence indicates that time doesn't pass, it accumulates. Their argument is that it's a historical argument, is that reading it on a historical register is bullshit because our evidence indicates that you don't answer. The James evidence indicates that black women are written out of history. There's no public record of black women's matrices. They have no place to be because black women exist in a space of captivity means that there's no way to write them within history because their bodies are required in life and death, the walking ghosts of the world, in order to render your affirmative coherent, which is the reason why your sequencing question makes a lot of sense in this context because the affirmative only maintains their coherence by relying on the distancing of themselves of the presence of the bodies like me in this debate. It's not a question of is the AF good, bad, but rather we're questioning the model that the model of the debate that the AF focus no explanation of why either of the permutations mean in the 1AR. You should hold the line and not let Herman, who acts poetic in the 2AR perm text, is not an argument. They have no explanation for how their over permutations avoid the links. He also drops severances and trignants, so it should be easy to reject the affirmative. They would reject the justification of the plan and add it on demands to civil society makes it impossible to be negative in their graph. It's a moving target, cruel optimism to say barely a single argument here. They emphasize small gains for black people, which creates a false hope and encourages black people to make demands upon the state, which are empirically met with violence. Ferguson, Baltimore, being alone, wall met with tear gas, arrested on mass shot on site, which means that there's a risk the affirmative leads to more violence hack the ass. The understanding of politics leads to more violence towards black people should outweigh, regardless of contingent ontological framing of solvency. I'm confused by Herman's interpretation of why our ontological arguments are not true. The only reason he says it's not true is because they're historically constitutive events. Our argument is that's a fucking problem, is history is then weaponized to justify current political relations. I don't think you've come to terms with our argument. Your argument is things are defined by moments/social relations, assumes that one could change the social relation that determines gratuitous violence. It's not predicated off of an interaction, but dereliction. Black skin is overcoded. Their arguments that all focus on the event about how history can change doesn't answer the fact that regardless of truth claims, black people are still open to gratuitous violence when they walk outside. Black skin is overdetermined, and you can't explain the intimate violence that happens towards black women. This cannot be explained through an avant-garde scenario planning, because there's no scenario to plan about white women liking to touch black women's hair, Miley Cyrus liking to twerk on black women's bodies. These are all intimate violence that are a direct trade-off of the James evidence. Read the evidence, tell me there's not a fucking trade-off between the F and the
The affirmative is good, the alternative may be good too, but the forced choice that they have posited between the two is bad and corrupts the alternative as well as the affirmative. That kind of forced choice is exactly the thing that the methodological pluralism contention of the 180 was designed to impact her, and there is no forced choice between talking about things like international relations and talking about things like intimate violence or racial rape. There is no false choice between talking about the Middle East and talking about the war at home. There is no false choice between talking about the military and the police. These kinds of false choices are what fracture both communities that are necessary to support individuals as well as prevent the kind of ressentiment that is the only terminal impact they're going for in the status quo. They're also necessary in order to continue the kind of incremental change that our Wenant evidence says is necessary to stop literal violence that is going on in the world. The framework debate is particularly important because only we have defended what the plan means and how we deploy it as a heuristic for breaking down violence in the surround. Scenario planning is good. Their only argument for why it's bad is that it focuses internationally. If we win that focusing on and talking about things outside of the home or outside of the U.S. is not necessarily bad, then scenario planning as a heuristic does not necessarily get co-opted and does give us the skills in order to break down violence both at home and abroad. There are multiple conceded arguments for why it's good coming out of the 2NR. It's good for deconstructing cognitive biases, for enabling information processing, for enabling a critical kind of objectivity that our Jones evidence says is necessary for epistemic decolonization, both by people in the European white Western world and people outside of it, contesting the kind of narratives that justify militarism is itself an impact and does scale up people from debate. Don't stay in debate. You never stay in the home. The public always filters back into the private, and the private filters into the public. Developing the toolkit necessary to bridge those gaps and to change the world is the only way that the alternative gets actualized, and the only way you end up fighting the kind of ressentiment and the ressentiment that sort of the cruel optimism of the status quo produces. The Bryant evidence is not talked about in the 2 is not talked about in the 2NR. The 1NR piece of evidence about ontology is something that we agree with. Ontology is first an understanding the ontology of the military is only something that our method allows. The only offensive argument they have about scenario planning is that it gets co-opted by other people out of this space. The Barma evidence explicitly answers. It says that the fact that scenarios have been used by corporations does not mean that they always must be used by such, and the 1AC did not use it for violence. What violence do we export globally? Why? Other than the fact that we talked about the world. They say that we are dogma. Disagreeing with totalism is not totalism. The ontology debate is not really dealt with very well by the 2NR, so I guess I'll do that here. They say that we're parasitic on blackness because we credit the structural positionality of the black woman. This is exactly what our day evidence impact turns. The unique position of the black woman becomes relational when it is hierarchized, when it is used to say that anti-blackness both determines and is more abject than things like settler colonialism and capitalism. This is the conflation of the epistemic and the ontological that they have not really dealt with throughout the entire round. If history does not prove their arguments, then individual embodied experience must, and that is bad when it is turned into an ontology argument. Wilderson relies on limited historical analysis, and Sexton relies on this kind of epistemic ontological conflation. That's bad because it becomes totalizing kind of authoritarian politics that devolves into authenticity tests rather than political engagement. There is not one grammar of suffering, but many grammars of suffering, which means you should err affirmative. It's a kind of Pascal's wager that should make you very wary of arguments for pessimism. The racial rape argument, subpoint A, is there is no forced trade-off and subordination of the argument to artificial debate. Competition produces a flawed ethical criteria for deciding on courses of action or theories in the world. The example is their household argument. Why is the house first? Doesn't the public always intrude on the intimate and vice versa? The Taylor evidence is conceded by the 2NR and is a justification for this in the context of the affirmative, in the context of the Middle East. Fear of terrorism and the dangerous Middle Eastern other creates Islamophobia, which strengthens police brutality at home. It leads to more militarized police and more police crackdowns, more stop and frisk, more Eric Garners, more and less success for Black Lives Matter. Their failure to focus internationally on the global dooms their alternative to failure. Subpoint B is it proves the methodological pluralism argument. The idea that either theory could address the other, that their theory could address ours in its entirety, or that ours could address theirs in its entirety, is wrong, which proves that they don't, which means that they don't explain the 1EC is not a dissent to the perm, but it proves that the idea of permutations is good. They say we suture, they say we don't believe the state is a monolith, we just believe that certain institutions that our nations exist and we should engage them because they're pretty damn violent. They say scenario planning is already answered above. Now the permutation debate, we didn't sever anything, we impact turned the notion of severance that they're trying to go for. The 1EC was not a fixed static object, and that 9 minutes is never enough to define the totality of the method, which is why pluralism is good. We didn't co-opt their speech, and we weren't parasitic because that relies on an idea of performance as intellectual property that's fundamentally neoliberal and recreates sort of racism and white supremacy. The plan debate is also terminally unfair and a bad model for debate that doesn't enable the process of contestation or revision that is the unique benefit to this space. The cruel optimism it leads to fatalism, which turns the resentment argument and sort of psychic violence argument, so it's not offense. There's also no uniqueness because the kind of individual individual refusal politics and pessimism doesn't sort of gain anything or remove the structural conditions that make optimism cruel. In the first place, the Ferguson arguments may be affectively appealing, but they do not counsel absolute pessimism unless they win the theoretical structure of their argument. The performance of the two in R cannot be divorced from the theoretical substrate of their argumentation, which means that they have to win the entirety of the ontology debate in order to win any of the other arguments. We're not using history to militate against you. Rather, we were illustrating that there's no epistemological basis for the totalizing ontological claims you're making. The libidinal economy arguments are conceded in the two and R. The fissures and cracks in the libidinal economy, the tensions and the conflicting nature of our desires prove that they are malleable, which proves consistency. Finally, the Hellester evidences another dropped impact turn to the alternative. Anti-humanism results in net more violence because it enables the kind of strategic division between races and people that justify the biological extermination of racism. We should deploy humanism strategically better rather than seeing the ground to the neocons and the biological races, which turns all of their impacts and makes it worse.